Good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are in the world. My guest today on The Inquisitive Analyst is a host of the podcast, The Voice of Leadership, author of Lead Yourself First, and an award winning consulting psychologist. She's president and CEO of Trans Leadership Incorporated, an executive leadership development consulting firm for executives in the mid to large sized global company range. She facilitates executive development and decision making, positive culture creation, change leadership, and executive succession. So please help me welcome to today's show, joining us all the way from Colorado Springs, Dr. Karen Wilson Starks. Welcome, Dr. Karen.
Thank you so much, Marcus. It's great to be here with you today.
You're welcome. Now, Dr. Karen, as the president and CEO of Trans Leadership Incorporated, you have more than 30 years of global experience as a trusted advisor for executives, which is overwhelming, certainly to me, because I'm nowhere even near there. You're a fellow of the American Psychological Association, a former U.S. Army officer and psychologist, and a senior faculty member for the Center for Creative Leadership. Now, with this solid background, you obviously have a deep insight into the psychology of leaders, what they want, how analysts can help them solve business problems, and that is what we're going to talk about today. So thank you for being on board with us.
Yes, outstanding subject. I love it.
All right, great. Here it goes. Now, we all know that analysts and executives think very differently. One is analysis-driven thinking, and one is more decision-making thinking. And we each frame problems and risks and outcomes quite differently. So what do you think would benefit analysts in sharing their expertise with C-suite leaders?
I'll just say something in general. This is a generalization. So keep in mind that generalizations are generally true. However,
Right.
there are always exceptions to the generalizations. A lot has to do with how issues are talked about. And with the people who are more analytical, more research based, more technical, what I find is that often there is an emphasis that's more on the tactical side of things and an emphasis on the discrete data points that are coming up in their research. So I see that analysts frequently are what I call research driven, and they're enamored with the research. When you think about the CEOs, it's the opposite. The CEOs are typically very strategic in their focus. They're looking at the whole landscape and they're vision led. So rather than being enamored with the research or anything like that, they're enamored with the vision and whatever supports the vision. So I think it's important when a person is an analyst is to think about the language of the person that you are speaking to so that you can match that person's language and to be able to put on different lenses to be able to see things from the vantage point of the person that you're talking to and that you're serving. So if I was to think about an analogy about what this might look like, it's how people read research articles. So, as a big picture person myself, when I'm reading a research article, I'm going to read the executive summary, I'm going to read the discussion first. If those are interesting and compelling, I'll go back and read the results section. I think that analysts very often will start with the results section, and if
Mm.
that's not compelling, they're not going to go to certainly not the discussion section because it would seem irrelevant. So just know when you're an analyst and you're speaking to the executive, they're going to start in the opposite way.
Okay, got it. Now, we've got this gap between how analysts and executives think. You've mentioned this big picture versus being analytical. And the idea between this gap, it can create some form of barriers, sometimes dilemmas. So what do you think analysts need to understand about the business to be more effective with executives?
Yes, I think you always have to keep in mind that your analysis, your data, your research is supporting a bigger business aim. And you must know what that is. And even down to the basics, such as who is it that the business serves? You got to be real clear about that. And when you think about the target market, what is the benefit from the business to the people in the target market? And what is it that that executive wants the business to be able to do better? What's the brand promise, if you will? And I think you have to understand this because if you don't, you may be solving, if you will, for the wrong issue. So your data is really about achieving the intent of the executive leader, the intent of the company, if you will. And your data can be very powerful because sometimes you will identify root causes that may not be obvious, which can really help the executive to solve for the right issue or be in position for the right opportunity. So the data can be useful that way. But the data is not the star. It's whatever that objective is of the business and what they want to achieve, and you helping them move from A, where they are now, to X,
Mm,
Y, or Z, where they're going.
okay. So we've discussed how to avoid dilemmas between executives and the analysts. Now, how can an analyst best partner with, say, other stakeholders to try to obtain the best scoping, the best analytical results?
Well, I think one thing that's really important to keep in mind, at least in my experience, most of the analysts are in what I would call an influence role, as
Mm,
opposed to being direct line leaders who can mandate that certain things happen. So when you're in an influential position, you have to really inspire others to get on board with what it is that you're doing or what it is that you're recommending. So I think that with that in mind, you have to think from the lens, and this applies to executives as well, but when we think about partners in the business, typically it's going to be partners in the business and sometimes external partners who are going to need to implement what it is that you are mentioning to the business. So with that in mind, you have to be thinking about what's important to the partner. What
mm,
is a barrier for them? Why is it that they may not want to implement what you're talking about? And I'm going to give an example. I have a client who is with a major payroll software solutions global business organization. And his analytical data showed that they needed to move to a new solution for the long term advantage and to have market advantage as they move forward in the business. However, their internal end users, as well as their external client end users, were really tied to the legacy product. They
mm,
resisted the change. They didn't really want to move in the new direction. They felt as though it would slow them down, hamper their progress, and they didn't want to have that short term dip, if you will, in order to leverage the long term benefit. So what we did is we really crafted a solution with him where he partnered with the partners to better understand what were the implementation challenges so that he could also provide solutions to that. So for example, something very similar, I mean simple, if you are implementing a new software solution and the people are not tech savvy and they're going to wonder, well, how am I going to learn this? I'm busy. I have my day job. I don't have time to learn this new software solution. Well, if you come and say, okay, here's how we plan to upskill you to get you ready. Here's the training we're putting in place, and not just the 500-page manual that you drop on the person's desk and they don't understand what they're reading, but there's somebody that's sitting there desk side, there's an 800 number there, different ways to get them trained up and ready to go. We also had him really listen so carefully to understand what those challenges were so that he could address them rather than focus only on the long term. He had to talk both long term, which is what he was concerned about, and short term, what they were concerned about. And some of those partners were even more influential in the
mm.
business. So having them to co present and to co lead some of the rationale and some of the reason and the how to of what we were going to do and what they were going to do, that actually led to success.
Hmm. Very nice, interesting. And sometimes it's always about just understanding what your stakeholder needs and wants and being able to cater to that, right? As you explained.
Exactly. That is the most huge thing. If people don't take anything else away, you've got to think with the mindset of the stakeholder. Yes.
Stakeholder. Now, talking about stakeholders and clients, sometimes your stakeholder, sometimes your client may miss providing potential value to an analyst when the analyst is trying to scope requirements. So how do you help analysts identify or even maybe explore that full spectrum of opportunities that are inherent in their data and their stakeholder insights?
Yes, and this is where the analyst has really got to be a great listener. You want to listen, in fact, even more than you want to advocate for your solution from your vantage point. As you listen, you're going to hear things that even the person who you're listening to may not see a connection to. And so that listening skill is key. And prior to the listening is having a mindset of curiosity so that you want to know what they're thinking about. And so the listening, the curiosity also leads to asking really good questions. And as you ask questions, then your person you're partnering with in the organization, if some light bulbs are going to go off in their head and some ahas, and they're going to give you more data and more information because they start seeing a broader and greater opportunity as well. So I think that listening is huge, the curiosity is huge, and asking the open-ended questions all the way around. Don't assume just because you ask a few questions that you've understood the whole landscape. So I think go deeper, stay in there longer, really understand deeply.
Okay, great. Now, one thing I really like about the services that you provide is you're all about stressing values-based, purpose-led leadership. And how do analysts integrate their, say, qualitative dimensions into their frameworks and into their business cases, would you say?
Yeah, this is really important, Marcus, what you're talking about. And it can be difficult to think about and difficult to do. And as an analyst, this is where you can be particularly valuable to the business leader because they know that there's some things that they want to do from, let's say, more of a qualitative perspective, but they may not know how to turn the qualitative idea into something that's visible and also measurable. So, here I'll give another example. I have a client who really works in a very large global US based company. However, the global part of this company is relatively new. They have been operating more in an Americentric, US centric way for a long time. Now they've got these partners all across the globe, and they're trying to increase the acumen internal to the organization about how do you operate in these other countries and other settings, which they're not going to be able to do on their own because there's a lot they don't know. So they have to partner with the people in those countries and who are on the ground. So there are behaviors that can demonstrate, well, are we really partnering in the way that is global right now, or we're still coming from an Americentric perspective? So we've started taking those qualitative things and saying, what are the behaviors that would demonstrate that we're doing this? So in the past, for example, all of the decisions would come out of American headquarters and kind of
Mhm.
like be pushed out, to the other countries. So that's the old way. The new way would be, okay, we're having focus groups in those countries. We're going over there and we're walking through their area and learning and we're listening and we're getting their ideas. We're partnering with them. We're doing focus groups. So they're behaviors that really
Mhm.
are measurable, even for qualitative concepts. And I think that's what an analyst can really help a business leader to think about is here's how it looks now behaviorally. When it's looking like this behaviorally, that's where we want to be. That's where we want to go. Now, how do we measure that?
Mhm. And we have to be culturally sensitive. I think that's important what you brought up because that's certainly an emotional side to finding data to be able to put your point across to other people. If you speak their language in their cultural context, then they also are able to understand you so much more easily.
This is so true. And it really parallels, Marcus, what we've been talking about all along. It's really speaking the language of whoever you're speaking to, whether it's internal, external, across the ponds, or, in your same country. So the same
Yeah,
skills just applied in the different context.
great, awesome. Now we've done. We're the analyst, or I'm the analyst, I guess. I've done my analysis. I based it on stakeholder requirements, and now I need to present these findings to an executive or a group of executives. right? And as an analyst, I don't want to lose the interest of these executives. I want them to stay focused on what I have to say. So how do executives prefer to hear information presented to them? And what can an analyst do to frame their data in a way that will be interesting to the executive?
Yes, I love this question. And I would say that remember, executives have very little time. Okay, so they don't want a 5 hour story unless they've asked you for 5 hours worth of data. They don't want that. So you want to start with the big picture. How does your data relate to the business objectives that are top of mind for that business executive? Not the things that are top of mind to you and why
Right.
you are recommending this solution, but what is the business issue that they're wanting to address? Start there. How does your data address something they inherently already care about? So that's one thing. The other thing is don't overwhelm the executive with too much data. Use your data to highlight the key points of what's of interest to them. And you're
Right.
starting with what's of interest to them. Now, you're going to have lots more data available. And you can even say at the beginning of the meeting, I'm just going to give you the key highlight data that really relates to what I know you care about. I have other data available. Ask me anytime. I'll present additional information. The key is let the executive ask you for more. Remember what I said earlier. They're looking for the executive summary. They're reading the discussion, section. They don't want the whole results section in 3 hours. They really don't. However, you could say something intriguing and they will ask you for those bits and pieces as they want to hear about them. I would also say it's important for as you as the analyst to talk about what is it going to take to implement and to do whatever it is that the executive wants. That includes the cost of implementing it. And if there are some costs that maybe they hadn't thought about, when I say costs, it could be time that people have to spend getting trained up or whatever that may be, and come with some solutions for those things because you want the implementation to go through. So already think about that in advance, come with some solutions. And then also, what's the cost of not doing whatever it is that you're talking about so that they understand and can make an informed decision and choice about whether to go in the direction you're recommending or not?
I like what you've mentioned, the idea of, is it in scope, but also what's not in scope? What's the cost, but what's not the cost of doing this? I like that, the opposites you've mentioned, and I think it's important for an analyst to see both sides. If you just see one side, you're only telling half the story, I think.
Yeah,
So,
that's exactly right. And one other thing I would throw in there, Marcus, is that sometimes the analyst will see a benefit that the executive is not thinking about. And although you won't lead with that, as you address what they're concerned over, also there's room for you to add the piece they're not thinking about. And now they're more willing to listen to that because you have addressed what they do care about.
splendid, amazing. Any additional pitfalls that analysts need to avoid when communicating with executives?
I would say, and it kind of maybe is a punctuation of what we've already been talking about, acting as if the data is the star of the show. That's a
Mhm.
problem. The data is not the star. The business objectives, the vision, the direction, the strategic intent, that's the star. And the data actually supports whatever it is that the business wants to do. If you keep that in mind, you'll be sharing the right talking points in the right order and at the right time. And I would say remembering that you as the analysts are essentially an internal consultant. So you're not the driver of the business, you're consulting to the business, and you want your consulting to really benefit the business. But if you try to drive from that seat, that's when I think a lot of analysts run into trouble.
I think that's actually really, really important. The evidence that we're giving them is just that. It's evidence to help support an argument. It's not
Mhm.
the argument in itself. You know, I like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. Uh, what do you think that the key data metrics analysts should use to examine to measure team performance, for example, or maybe even diagnosing improvement areas? Any key data metrics that analysts should look at for that?
Well, I think we have to define a little bit first what teamwork is and what it isn't. A lot of organizations talk about teams. Oh, we want to help the such and such team right now, whatever. And in fact, those working entities are groups and not teams. So when you're really dealing with a true team, and especially a high performance team, that team, the work that they do is interdependent. Every person on that team is needed because they're bringing different skills, different abilities, that they're not covering the exact same territory, and collectively they get the result. If you take a person out, if you take an aspect out, they don't have what they need to accomplish the objective because they really are interdependent. So if an analyst was looking at that, they want to measure the interdependence aspect, what people are bringing individually, what are they bringing from their cross-functional part of the organization where they're serving on this team, and what are those interdependencies. Those need to be named and need to know what they are. So that's one thing. The other thing about teams that are high performance, they're constantly giving each other feedback on what they're doing, and they're giving each other feedback in real time, both the positive and also the negative, so you can measure that. And when are they doing what I call the after action review? So everything they do, they should be stopping, and this was something we did a lot in the military, was the after action review. And it's something that you do to so you can learn and do something better the next time, or apply the learning even to a new area. So analysts can help to measure the feedback that people are giving. Are we setting time out to give each other feedback in that group context, to do the after action reviews? And then how does that lead to the learning? So analysts can capture what's the organizational learning, how is it being applied to other areas, what's the innovation that's coming out of this. So I think there's a lot of room for analysts to help if they really understand what it is that they're looking at.
When we do public speaking, or we go in to sell a product to a customer, we're always asking for feedback, because that's one way that you can improve yourself over time. And I think if one is analyzing those improvement metrics, just imagine how much more value it is for the analyst and for the executive. I think that's good, and for the team, obviously.
Oh, yeah, because a lot of times people have experiences, but they don't stop to reflect on the experiences, and therefore they lose a lot of the learning and new
Yeah.
application that comes from those experiences. So taking the time to reflect, to analyze, and to identify the learnings, you keep it then when you do that.
Awesome. And on that note, what role does analysis really play in helping to scale a culture that supports innovation, supports agility, that supports customer relevance? Any answer to that? How does an analyst play, or what role does an analyst play in scaling a culture that supports innovation, agility, and customer relevance?
I think it's very similar to what we talked about with teamwork, which is understanding what are the building blocks and the components of such a culture.
Mm.
So, for example, if you have a culture that really is into innovation, then you have to value experimentation by your people. You have to let mistakes be learning rather than mistakes that cause people to lose their career positions or their career progression. So you have to see that each of these mistakes is new learning that you'll build upon. Now, of course, if they're making the exact same mistakes over and over again,
Yeah.
that's a problem. But new
Right.
mistakes that's new learning, and you want a culture that supports that. You also want an environment again that's got the continuous learning mindset. So that's how you frame mistakes. Now there's some cultures that are blame oriented as opposed to learning oriented. And so an analyst can help to tease out the behavior that actually says to the organization, yeah, we want you to experiment. Do they have places where they're doing demonstration projects and pilot projects? So on a smaller scale, they can test something, or they can roll something out in a way that they can learn without having a big, huge error because they rolled it out to the whole organization globally before they knew what they were dealing with. And maybe they have skunk works groups or, special research areas to test ideas. So there's evidence. Do we have that? And what are we learning from those groups? And then as far as the customers, you've got to have mechanisms for ongoing customer conversations. That might mean, are there focus groups? Are you doing surveys? Do you have people there at the customer's place asking questions, getting feedback on a regular basis? Because you can't just make up what you think the customer wants or needs. You have got to interface with the customer, even to test out an idea that you've developed that you think would be useful, but you still got to talk to them, and they will probably refine it because they're going to see things you don't see. So I think an analyst can help to identify all that and figure out how do we measure those, again, actions and behaviors.
Superb. Well, it's been a splendid time talking to you. It really gives, I think, clarity on the role of an analyst, how the analyst can decipher information that's coming from the executive, how the analyst can portray information, articulate information to the executive for this win-win relationship. So thank you once again, Dr. Karen, for being on the show.
You are welcome, and I'm so delighted to have been here with you. This is an important topic, and I hope people will take away value they can use.
Most definitely. And on one last note, anyone wants to get in touch with you, how can they do so?
Yes, they can reach me on LinkedIn for sure. That's a great place, especially sending me a direct message on LinkedIn. They can also go to my email address, which is Dr. Karen, Karen, at transleadership.com.
Superb. And I will post a link to your website and to your LinkedIn at the bottom of this video on YouTube. So for those who need to get in touch with you or want to get in touch with you, by all means, just look at the bottom of this YouTube video and you'll be able to find it. Well, thanks again, Dr. Karen. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Marcus.
All right. You're welcome. Take care.